Diane, could I say one thing?
Of course.
I just want to go back to one thing that you said, which I want to elaborate on. You mentioned about China building all of the apartments and entire cities. I think a lot of people don't know that those cities are almost completely vacant. And the reason is the people bought those apartments. And what happened was China didn't finish the job. The electrical wasn't done, the plumbing wasn't done, and a lot of those people cannot move into those apartments. So basically, they're vacant cities.
On the China question, I think it would be very important, and we can take this up more because LaRouche's widow, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, was there in 1996. And there's been a shift over decades, right? Since the end of the Cultural Revolution, when Mao died, and people very consciously said, we have to reverse this horrible destruction. And there were also mistakes made, which we warned them about, like going with Bush and the free trade zones, where you built up all the slave labor on the coastlines. But once they decided to build the heartland, very much like what Abraham Lincoln did with the Transcontinental Railroad, once they shifted their approach very much to what would be considered American system economics, they were able, and they took a target. They said, we should not have people in extreme poverty. And by 2020, we want no one in extreme poverty. And what China did was not send out checks, that people were assigned to go to the regions and find out why people were poor, and then create an industry, create a new kind of farm. It was very willful. And I think one of the reasons why there is such a vilification right now of China in the United States, and this is not to say that they're perfect or there are things that, you know, it's a completely different culture, a completely different system. But one of the reasons for the vilification and lack of discussion of what was done there is because they actually did lift 850 million people out of extreme poverty. And when you talk to some of the young people there, they say things. I saw an interview with a guy, and the person was saying, have you seen a change in your standard of living in your lifetime? And he said, yeah, when I was born, my entire family lived in one room. Now I and each of my three brothers has our own house. And the change has been so dramatic. Or what I said about Egypt, building this entire new city, and they're building an entire nuclear plant complex that's going to desalinate ocean water and green the desert. Or the nation of Ghana in Africa, which is building 110 new hospitals. And if Americans knew about this, they'd say, oh my goodness, these countries were so far behind us. They were so much more impoverished than we are even now. How is it that they could make a decision to change the direction and turn on a dime? And I think we would find a much greater revolt here because it's almost accepted. It's almost culturally accepted right now that every generation is going to have a harder time than the previous one. So if people kind of take for granted, well, my kids are never going to get out of the house because they're not going to be able to afford to pay tuition and rent. So then you have family formation delay. In other words, it's this whole cycle of getting worse and worse from one generation to the next.
Going backwards.
Exactly. And the point is, the future is not determined by the past. That is, we don't have to continue a trajectory that we're on. We can say, you know what, this is too much. We're going to turn this around now. We're going to put this thing through bankruptcy. We're not going to give a single more $1 trillion to this Wall Street fraud. We're going to and change it. And the other thing, as you hear from Bruce, but you know, the Army Corps of Engineers has designed thousands and thousands of projects. The blueprints are done. There's even major water management projects that have already been approved by Congress and were never funded. So there's a huge amount of work that we don't we don't have to even do over again. We just have to demand that it happens.